So I arrived at the University of Kentucky in 2004, and although at the time there wasn't a lot of heroin use, very early on we started to hear about signals of prescription opioid abuse in eastern Kentucky and prescription opioid injection, which was unusual at the time since some of the work done in the late 90s found very few injection drug users in that area of the country. So when folks are injecting, that unfortunately puts them at risk for hepatitis C and HIV. So we wrote a grant to NIDA in 2007 to establish a longitudinal cohort study of injection drug users and other prescription opioid abusers to determine their risk for hepatitis C and HIV. So we established a longitudinal cohort study in Hazard in 2008. We've been following 500 injection and non-injection prescription opioid users since that time. We're still actively following about 400 of those folks, and we've been funded 2 additional times from NIDA to continue the cohort. I think the major finding from that study is the high prevalence of hepatitis C, which was recognized by CDC as some of the earliest signals of the HCV epidemic in rural Appalachia, as well as some of the different drug abuse patterns that we've seen in the changing drug abuse patterns over time with the emergence of the abuse deterrent formulation of OxyContin. Certainly we saw a shift there from that being the primary drug of abuse to drugs such as roxicodone, so immediate release oxycodone, and more recently gabapentin. When we first started discussing conducting this study, I was talking to noted social network researcher Carl Latkin, and we were talking about the close-knit communities in rural areas, and he said that lends itself so well to social network analysis because with traditional social network analysis in urban areas, you have a whole lot of people transitioning in and out of the network, whereas the networks in rural areas are pretty stable over time, which allows us to really examine the changes in the network over time and how that may impact risk behaviors. So from the start of the study, we are looking at the relationships between the individuals within the study and other folks they mention as well. And we've been able to examine that graphically, which I think is very impactful because you can actually see the connections between individuals. And we actually have a very well-connected network. And unfortunately, that can facilitate disease transmission, as we've seen. And when we look at the network over time, what we see is most of the people who were hepatitis C negative at baseline who end up seroconverting over time had a direct connection to someone who was already hepatitis C positive. I think that we're at an advantage in that we can really leverage the networks for positive interventions. So just as disease can transmit through the network, information can be transmitted through the network as well. So interventions that we propose in the future, I believe that it will be to our advantage to utilize the existing network structure to help facilitate moving the interventions through the network. And we can measure that, which is very nice as well, because we can see how far the intervention makes it through the network, how it diffuses through the network. I think at the end of the day, the data demonstrate that HCV, I think, has been the biggest impact that prescription opioid injection has had in the region. And most of the Appalachian states surrounding Kentucky and Kentucky have the highest rates of HCV incidence in the country. So clearly this is an issue. I think it's really important to have potentially policies that span Appalachia so that drug users can access services in all areas of Appalachia. I think it's also important for the drug users to know what services are available in that area. I think that the UK really were some of the first researchers to detect a signal in terms of prescription opioid abuse was becoming an epidemic in rural areas. And not a lot of universities are necessarily conducting rural research. And I think what this prescription opioid epidemic did was shed light on rural research and Appalachian research in particular. And UK was already on the ground, which was really nice. We've been conducting research in rural areas for years. So I think in that aspect, UK was certainly at an advantage.